Welcome, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to the IPI. And I would like particularly to welcome our two distinguished speakers, Mr. Khaled Al-Khamissi to my left, and Mr. Kamel Riahi of Tunisia to my right. This is the second session of the IPI Intellectual Series. The first session, as you recall, was devoted to the Libyan and Yemeni uprisings. Today's session will be devoted to Tunis and Egypt, and indeed the transition of these two important Arab countries from authoritarian to democratic rule. The first session in the series did indeed validate the IPI belief that to best understand the shift in contemporary Arab history, it is imperative to listen to those who were instrumental in bringing about the demise of the authoritarian rule by influencing and educating Arab youth about their rights in an evolving world. People around the world were modernizing and transcending barriers to advancement, while the Arab world was sadly seen to be traveling reversely in time. It was not only stagnant, it was going backward. The uprisings, which constitute the Arab Spring, came to put an end to the stagnation and the drift backward. They also ushered in an era in which the Arab world is confidently rejoining the modern world and contributing to the development of human civilizations, as they did in past era, where freedom and tolerance reigned. Tolerance and the negation of identity politics, which characterizes the Arab Spring, are the sine qua non for stability, development, and prosperity, and are cardinal for the success of the Arab march toward modernity. I'm accentuating tolerance because it is sadly a commodity in short supply in our part of the world. For democracy to take roots, tolerance must be the norm in Arab intellectual discourse. I'm equally concerned about the seeming lack of political will among Arab intellectuals to address the politics of identity. Stability and harmony of societies will not be obtained unless and until we address discrimination on the basis of ethnicity or religious orientation, and unless that discrimination is jettisoned once and forever. Let me stop here and give the floor to our two distinguished panelists. We are indeed very fortunate to have with us today two extraordinary Arab intellectuals. To my left, as I said, is Khaled Al-Khamissi of Egypt. Khaled Al-Khamissi was born in 1962. Is most famous for his bestseller, Taxi, in which he threads together conversations with Cairo taxi drivers, celebrating Egyptian popular culture at the same time as providing a bitterly honest critique of Egyptian society. Taxi is surprisingly relevant today, for it describes the social ills that led to the Egyptian uprising focusing on individuals suffocated by the economy and a repressive state. Taxi was published by the prestigious Dar al-Shuruq in January of 2007 and has been translated into more than 10 languages. The Daily Star newspaper of Egypt called it, quote, a delightful journey into the psyche of the Egyptians in the beginning of the 21st century. In October of 2009, Dar al-Shuruq published his second novel, Noah Ark. Mr. Al-Khamissi has participated in the uprising and writes a weekly column for al-Shuruq Daily. Mr. Al-Khamissi is also a film director, producer, and has written scripts for drama and documentary films. He has studied political science at Cairo University and the Sorbonne, where he focused on Egyptian political economy. And he told me all of his friends he knew from university went to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I said, it's better you remain as a novelist than not a diplomat. And to my right is another distinguished Arab intellectual, Kamel Riahi of Tunisia. He was born in Tunis in 1974. He has published 2 collections of short stories and 2 novels. The first entitled Al-Mashrat, which won him, or the Scalpel, which won him the 2001 Comar d'Or for Arabic literature. A chapter from this novel was published in the anthology Beirut 39, edited by Samuel Shimon and published by Bloomsbury, London and New York. The anthology celebrated the Hay Festival Project Beirut 39, a collaboration for Beirut World Book Capital, where a team of judges selected the best 39 Arab authors, age 39 and under. So Mr. Riahi is very young. Kamel Riahi works was translated to French, Italian, and Hebrew. And with that, I would like first to invite Kamel to start the introduction, and then we will go to Khaled after Kamel. Khaled, you have the floor. شكرا. الحقيقة.
First of all, welcome. In the first meeting between the late Egyptian thinker Nasser Hamid Abu Zaid with the Dutch audience when he fled Egypt after a fatwa was issued against him to separate him and his wife, and the well-known fatwa of apostasy because he discussed a study on religious thought. That first time, Nasser Hamid Abu Zaid stood before the Dutch audience and he declared the Islamic Shahada, which aimed to draw a line or build a wall in front of anyone who would one day accuse him of being a collaborator and an agent of the West. And today I will do the same thing. I will welcome you. And I declare that there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad is his prophet. However, this is not for the same reasons that Nasser Hamid Abu Zaid had. Rather, I fear that the United States would declare me an apostate and issue a fatwa against me because it is now, for us today, Arabs, it is the official sponsor of religious parties in the revolutionary Arab states. I hope that this would be the first message that I send from this podium. The second such message, it's also an American one. It's a statement by Henry Miller in which he says, For a revolution to be effective, it must continue mercilessly. And it's not enough to just topple governments and tyrants. Rather, one must also topple the thoughts that he has inherited about wrong and right, about evil and good, and about justice and injustice. We must leave the trenches and breathe the fresh air. And this is what we will do always in our Arab states that have experienced the revolution. I would like to talk about the role of literature and about my personal experience in Tunisia. There's always, or rather, the media, official media, always talks about the absence of readers and that Tunisian books do not sell and that Tunisian readers don't buy books. Even though Tunisian libraries continue to import books from abroad. And this, of course, is a great way to nullify those claims that Tunisians don't read. The Tunisian people are fully aware that what is declared in the media in terms of literary works or books that claim to be books of ideas and of thought, that they're not really all right and that these books don't really represent them. And while some writer or some voices, some literary voices in Tunisia move in the dark and they publish their own works at their own expense because publishing houses are standing against them and against these cruel and works that are harsh on the toppled dictatorial regime. These works used to be smuggled to the Tunisian audience and would run out of copies very quickly, such as Kamel Al-Khamissi's work, a Tunisian thinker and author, and Abdel Jabbar Al-Asht as well. He's also a Tunisian novelist, another Sahrawi, who smuggled his novel abroad so that it would be published. All of these are names that not many Tunisians know and are only known by some Tunisians who follow the cultural scene, because the regime has definitely succeeded in cutting short these voices and silencing them. Of course, we need to mention here the free thinker Salim Dawla. This Tunisian thinker and philosopher has stood throughout his life against Ben Ali's regime in the Tunisian street and was even prevented from continuing his education, his university education. Of course, in terms of the theater, we need to mention here the work of Tawfiq al-Jbeli and Al-Fadl al-Jaibi and Jalila Bakar. These are voices that have reached the West and that have reached the East as well because of the long experience of their presence. The people I mentioned earlier are younger and are of the new generation, which continue to struggle to make their voices heard in a very dark environment. In 2009, I had an experience with Ben Ali's regime. I was put on the list for 10 years. I was forbidden to have employment in Tunisia because of my positions and because of my writings. Because until I was 37 years old, I did not receive a single penny from the Tunisian Republic, and she did not, and this republic did not care about this person who's been alive since 1974. How is this person alive? How is he living? Of course, I was surviving through my correspondence letters to Arab and foreign papers. And of course, whoever would correspond with these papers without the patronage of the authority was considered a traitor, of course. I was a free writer and I was a freelance journalist who did not belong to any establishment, and I would be called as a result of what I publish in the papers. Of course, I'd like to mention here what Tawfiq Ben Brik, the well-known Tunisian journalist, has done, who has confronted this regime and challenged it. So in 2007, the award was received in 2007 for the novel Al-Mashrat, The Scalpel, which exposed Ben Ali's regime. Therefore, the state at the outset decided to besiege it, and it wasn't allowed to be registered legally. And at that time, I threatened to publish it online, and I did indeed start publishing it online for a while, but it was later released and subjected under another form of censorship, in that the book was forbidden from being displayed in the windows of bookshops even after it received more than 3 Arab, Tunisian, and international awards. Yet there was a ban on placing it in the front windows of stores. That book had to be hidden as if it was a sin, and that was an added form of insult to me. And in 2009, the unemployment problem got worse, and this is, of course, what has sparked the revolution. This extremely dire social situation in Tunisia. At the time, I had written I had a confrontation between me and President Ben Ali. I decided to confront him through letters that I posted on Facebook, and I would correspond with him on a daily basis. I would send him letters, and the first letter was a very normal one with my own background information. And as a Tunisian artist, I was demanding my right to work. Of course, attempts began at that point to shut down my Facebook account, and especially since I posted my picture and behind me a picture of Democracy Street. It's a street in Tunisia called Democracy. And every time we put a street name, we always know that it's also a statement of irony, because we have Democracy Street and Freedom Street. So there were attempts to block my account, and I opened a new account. And since then, the messages started taking a different character. They became more satirical. I said I'm a Bedouin. I'm from the northwestern area, and this is, of course, a completely forgotten area that was forgotten by Bourguiba and by Ben Ali. And I said, because I'm a rural person, I can't visit you without any gifts. Therefore, I will send with you, with every message, a paragraph or a section of a new novel that I'm working on. And this novel was a novel that was against and that was satirical of Ben Ali's regime, and it was a rewriting of an incident that happened in Tunisia. It's a marginal, unknown Tunisian man who climbed the 7 November clock tower. This is the picture of the clock tower. It's called the 7 November Tower, which is a symbol of Ben Ali's regime, which, of course, toppled the Bourguiba regime before it, and toppled the Bourguiba statue, and in its place built this odd clock tower. This man stayed up for 7 hours, and this is a very important number for Tunisia, because it happened on November 7 in 87 against Habib Bourguiba, and this number has grown negative in Tunisian memory. So this man went up the tower and stayed there for 7 hours. And this clock tower remained for 23 years a symbol of Ben Ali's regime. This man, one day in August, climbed up this clock tower and stayed there for 7 hours. He created a large amount of chaos in the square, in the square below it. And this clock tower was built directly in front of the Ministry of Interior, and hence the danger. Of course, this is the Tunisian King Kong. He created a terrifying effect and a panic for the authorities that mobilized all its machinery to try to bring him down. And he was only brought down 7 hours later and was, of course, taken to his place of final abode, the Tunisian Ministry of Interior, to its dungeons, where they have a political torture party. The media sources, even foreign media, said that a man who was mentally unstable climbed up this clock tower and demanded money, etc. Of course, as a writer, as a novelist, I wasn't really sold on that official tale. Therefore, I decided to write a biography of this person who did what every Tunisian had wanted, i.e., to climb the clock tower of the dictatorship and to stop its hands, to stop the hands of time for this regime. And therefore, I started writing this novel, and I would send every day a letter to the president with part of this novel. And every day there would be an attempt to shut down my Facebook account. And after that, of course, I received phone threats, etc. And this continued for 2 weeks. And a journalist said that the Facebook audience was asking Kamel Riahi to finish up the novel because there was actually an audience that was following the novel, not the letters. And after that, I went on a hunger strike for a week. After I failed in this attempt, after these letters did not manage to fulfill a very basic demand, which is a demand for employment, my hunger strike ended, of course, fruitlessly. And after that, I went to Algeria. I immigrated. All I had was a backpack. And I went to Algeria, which was the closest country. I spent 7 months there. And then after that, I resigned from the Supreme Arab Academy for Translation. I was the head of the translation department there. I returned to Tunisia after that, back to unemployment, because I believed that this regime must be opposed from the inside. And I personally, like other Tunisians, felt very combative. And we believed that Tunisia is our responsibility as artists and thinkers. And the first confrontation after my return happened when I showcased my novel in a theater, in a cultural center, which forced the audience to flee during the performance, along with other performances. And this, of course, led to me being pursued and investigated by the Ministry of Interior. But the revolution was sparked, and we went with the revolution with our new dream. And this is a simple response to anybody who thinks that intellectuals did not have a role in the revolution. On the contrary, we were there, we were in the shadows, we were the unknown soldiers who were manipulating or who were moving and controlling the opposition scene. Their voices may have grown dimmer after the revolution, but before the revolution, they were decisive, they were suicidal in their confrontation of authority. This authority is a violent model police state in the world that was formed by Western patronage, by Italian patronage, followed by American patronage of this regime until it finally fell. I'll stop here. I wanted to read part of the novel, but I think I spoke for too long. So I'll stop here, and the novel is available, and you can view it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kamel, for a fascinating discourse on the role of the intellectual in the revolution and the uprising of Tunis, which I think is very important. Now I will give the floor to Khaled Al-Khamissi to talk about the experience of the Egyptian uprising.
مساء الخير.
Good afternoon, everyone. I was asked to speak for a period of 5 to 8 minutes. My friend went overtime, and I'm demanding equality because we're in a place with a certain degree of diplomacy, with leaders of diplomacy. I just want to say that today there's a large demonstration in Midtown Cairo, which is the coalition of independent, which was called for by the coalition of independent culture and thought, and the gathering started as well in Talat Harb Square, is to demand the release of political prisoners. Slogans are being issued demanding the end of military rule, quote unquote. In about an hour, a seminar will be held and will be attended by a large number of Egyptian intellectuals to celebrate the International Day of Tolerance. I am going to use the word tolerance as a speaker in English that His Excellency the Ambassador mentioned today. Today is the International Day of Tolerance, and today there's an important seminar being held in Cairo in an hour's time in Midtown Cairo in Babilou Square that will discuss tolerance and how it can be the nucleus of thought processes in the coming days. Also in Cairo today, the Dr. Layla Swaif's hunger strike continues along with others. They have gone on a hunger strike demanding the release of political prisoners in Egyptian prisons. This is just to draw a quick picture about what's happening in Cairo today or within the next 2 hours. Here, I would demand equal opportunity, and I would ask. I personally think that we can't interpret what happened in the Arab world in 2011 without looking back a bit, without rereading the steps that were taken over the past decades and years, which have led to today's Arab revolutions, because without them, we will be perpetual prisoners of the now, of current events, and prisoners of what's going to happen in the next elections, what happened in the Tunisian legislative elections. We will continue to be prisoners of instant details that we must step away from so that we could take a broader look at things, and this can only happen by attempting to reread modern and contemporary history. Since I'm giving introductory remarks here, I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to what happened in Egypt, in my opinion, and in the Arab world in the 20th century. And it's basically in 2 points, the first of which, 1881 until this very day, very quickly, this is what has happened. And the second part of the introduction will be what happened in the past 6-7 years, and which led us to 2011. So if I were to draw a historical picture of the last 120 years, we will see that the Arab world went through 3 main stages. In my opinion, these stages began in 1881 with Ahmed Urabi standing in Aberdeen Palace before Khedive Tawfiq, asking him for the first time and very clearly demanding political freedom for the citizen, and that citizens have political rights and must have an opinion in what happens in the political arena. This happened at the same time the Egyptian parliament was formed and led by Sharif Pasha. After that, we started an important phase in Egypt's history and in Arab history. This was a progressive and Renaissance project, which was cultural in its foundation, as usual, and it was ideological. And I can even say that Imam Muhammad Abdo was the movement's cultural foundation. Saad Zaghloul was its political foundation. Sayyid Darwish was its musical foundation. Mukhtar was its artistic foundation. Qasim Amin was its social foundation in his demands for the liberation of women and his two famous books on women and the liberation of women. Taha Hussein, of course, was one of the main foundations of this era. This was an era of a secular project which continued to support an important economic development whose foundation in Egypt was Talat Harb, who established the Bank of Egypt in 1920. And during that period, from 1881 to 1952, which up until Jamal Abdel Nasser's revolution, that was an era of economic and cultural ascent. This was an era of an important cultural and ideological renaissance, but then it ended because this project, after World War II ended, did not realize that the fruit has matured and that the time for picking it has come, and that we must grab independence immediately and end things with the British Empire forever. This project did not realize this historic opportunity, and there was a delay from 45 to 52, which started another era, which is the army's intervention to establish another kind of project. It was also a secular project based on the armed forces. It was also a pan-Arab project, but it was not democratic. It did not understand freedoms, really. And this ended in 1967, which was another important phase here. It ended in 1967 with the defeat. This defeat broke the back of this secular revolutionary project, socialist project, pan-Arab project, etc. And starting in 1967 until now, we have lived an era, what we can call the Saudi era. And it's a depressing era. It's very depressing, actually. And this started with al-Bakr, who was the former Iraqi president, and his right hand, Saddam Hussein, rose to power in Iraq, and then Ja'far Numeri in Sudan rose to power, and after that, Gaddafi rose to power in Libya. A few months later, Anwar al-Sadat rose to power in Egypt, and a few months after that, or not really, 1 month later, Hafez al-Assad, the father in Syria, rose to power. This group, all of these men, really contributed to launching a conservative era, economically speaking. And this project was a project of the full American occupation of the area. Arab will and the will of Arab governments, one after the other, became subservient to the idea of the dominance of the American empire over Arab capacities and capabilities. And this also witnessed the rise to power of the Saudi Wahhabi thought, with its funding and with its petrodollars that dominated the culture and the media. Today, we are in a new stage, and that other stage ended because it did not understand, because we need to harvest and reap the fruits of independence, and the one after that ended because it did not understand the value of freedom, and the third phase is ending these days because there is an international and global crisis, be it economic or It's a capitalist economic as well as a capital economic crisis and an environmental crisis. And there, there are a lot of global crises that are jeopardizing this current era and will take it to an inevitable end. And we're at the doorsteps of a new era. This was point one. The second point I wanted to discuss was what happened in the past 5-6 years in Egypt. We cannot understand what happened in 2011 without taking a look at what happened in the past 5 or 6 years, without examining it seriously. Starting in 2004, real labor, student, cultural protest movements began, and a large number of independent unions and coalitions were formed, such as the Coalition of Independent Universities, the Independent Coalition of Culture, as well as Kifaya movement, or Enough movement, and other opposition movements. And 2005 was a pivotal year with the legislative elections and the huge amount of fraud that happened there, not to mention the presidential elections. And several elements of the constitution were amended in order for Mubarak to allow his son to inherit the presidency. And then there was a pivotal turning point in Egypt's modern history. And with 2005, a group of social protest movements began to grow gradually and to develop gradually. And at this time, what I can call a complete cultural revolution began. This cultural revolution was embodied in the emergence of many independent theatrical troupes, many independent musical groups and bands, as well as poetry gatherings, for example. A large number of bookshops mushroomed. I am of a generation that witnessed the closing down of bookshops in Egypt in the 70s. I never imagined that I would live to see new bookshops emerging, and this is what has happened in the past few years. More than 60 or 70 bookshops have been established in Cairo only, in Midtown Cairo, which is where I'm from. I can say that there are at least 20 new bookshops that have opened their doors in the past few years. The number of new publishing houses was increasing quickly, as well as the sale of books. Books used to be sold, at 500 copy editions and 2,000 max. Now, some of them are being sold at tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of copies, editions. And at the same time, we also witnessed new generations of intellectuals whose performance was completely different from the performance of Egyptian intellectuals of the era of the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s. Several intellectuals have appeared who were working completely outside the box of the political regime. The experience that my Tunisian colleague has just described, he's a young man who has lived all his life outside the political bubble, is the same experience of hundreds of Egyptian intellectuals who worked outside the political sphere as well, starting in the year 2000. This did not happen before. A large number of Egyptian intellectuals were tamed, and this word tamed was something that in the past 20 years have acquired the meaning that these intellectuals are basically a bunch of chickens who were put in a chicken pen, chicken coop, and the political regime just had to feed these chickens and keep them happy in their pen, and nobody was the wiser. these chickens have disappeared. They no longer exist. They can no longer be heard. They have lost their credibility. They have lost their true connection with the audience, with the people, with, and now we have intellectuals who work outside the regime with a free voice, with an independent voice. Some of the young writers chose the Facebook route, like my colleague. Others chose other means. But what is definite is that we have experienced a complete cultural revolution that came in tandem with a revolution, or what we would qualify as a revolution, i.e., protest movements inside specific social circles, and this slowly and gradually culminated and is still continuing. And today, the Egyptian army and the Egyptian media are now calling these groups as factional groups, using the word factional, i.e., they only belong to a certain faction and not others. This aims to create the impression that these movements are not social and don't represent society as a whole. But these protest movements are not factional at all. Rather, they are social movements calling for change, and each one has its own specialization. And this is happening calmly and confidently and with sustainability. It started in 2004 and continues to this very day. Without forming an accurate understanding of how this has happened in the past 5 years, and also without understanding the development of political awareness among Egyptian and Arab citizens starting 1881 until this very day, and without following the protest movements throughout this era of history starting in 1881, we won't be able to understand what has happened in 2011. I will conclude with the following. It is extremely dangerous to imagine that what is happening today in Egypt or in Tunisia or in other states in the Arab world is the final chapter. Rather, we are writing the first letters of the first words of the introduction. We haven't even started with the first chapter. This is an introduction that we have come a long way in writing. What will happen in the next elections in Egypt is completely insignificant. What will happen in the presidential elections is also insignificant completely. In that case, what is significant? What is significant is how civil society has developed throughout the past years, how protest movements have developed and grown calmly and quietly and continue to grow, how labor and student movements operate, and these mechanisms of movement must be understood. They're new, as well as the mechanisms to communicate with the masses through what is called the communications revolution. We must also understand this. We must also understand the thought methodology of Arab youth, who form 65 to 70% of the Arab world and who are younger than 25 years of age. These youth, who form about 70% of Arab societies, have a different thought process compared to previous generations. We need to understand what their way of thought is. I'm going to give the last example and I will end. A young man, after Mubarak was toppled, went on TV and said, "We must work on combating corruption, and to combat corruption, we must create a project that will be divided over 12 months, 365 days, with a schedule on what we should do every day of that year. And every month we will do a follow-up and review of the last 30 days. This is the first stage for change, and we should not use any other criteria and only focus on one issue and have a 365-day schedule for it. This thought mentality is completely foreign to any thought process that Arab intellectuals used to deal with national issues through in the past years. So we are in a new era, a new thought process, a new methodology. And all of these are based on cultural development, social development, and I hope that we would stop looking down.
For a thought-provoking intervention, it's very interesting. I'm going to open the floor for those who want to pose questions or advance comments or observations. The floor is open. Yes, please.
Hello, I'm Craig Charney from the Charney Research Company and the International Peace Institute. I'm going to ask about a word that I think neither of you gentlemen mentioned unless it was missed in the translation, and its relation to Arab intellectuals, and that word is liberalism. Both of you have talked about how...
Can you lower your device?
Oh, sorry. Here.
All the way down the bottom.
Can you just turn it off? Yeah.
Thank you.
Both of you have talked about how the Arab intelligentsia and how the Egyptian and Tunisian societies are trying to reinvent democracy. Yet there have been no democracies that have succeeded in sustaining themselves, in combating corruption, or helping the poor, which were not liberal democracies with liberal economies. So my question for you is, you've talked about how the Arab intelligentsia is helping to reinvent democracy. Do you think it will be courageous enough also to help to reinvent Arab liberalism without being accused of being imperialist agents? Thank you.
Thank you. Kamel?
Just in case.
طيب بالنسبة
As for Tunisia, of course, I discussed the artists and the creative persons who have confronted the authoritarian regime at a certain stage. Of course, talking about the problem of the failures of the intelligentsia is also important, and this was exposed and this was unveiled by the Tunisian elections, which were concluded a few days ago. And today we, the first Tunisian head of state, post-revolutionary head of state, will be anointed, and he is a doctor and a singer, Dr. Al-Munsif Al-Marzougi, who enjoys an international, a national consensus that he is the leader of the agreed upon party in Tunisia, even though he did not win the elections, or he did not win first place in the elections, which Al-Nahda won the first place of the elections. But Munsif Al-Marzougi, his party received second place in the elections, and he was appointed the president of the state. Yes, there are shortcomings, which became apparent after the revolution, because they could not reach the masses. And the progressive parties, or the parties that claim to be progressive and liberal and leftist parties, showed great weakness and great shortcomings in the during the elections period. And the left wing in Tunisia, unfortunately, is a very bourgeois left wing, and this is extremely ironic. And I think in Egypt as well, most of the left wing is of the bourgeois class. of one of the reasons the success of some populist lists won the elections, this in itself is proof that thinkers were unable to communicate with the masses, and there are reasons for that. For example, the media in the post-revolutionary area completely dismissed all intellectual voices and all thinkers. They were brushed aside from the political scene, even though the situation in Tunisia is primarily a cultural and intellectual one. And this this very weak political performance is a result of the absence of this cultural aspect. We did not see a single Tunisian artist or creative person since the revolution being interviewed on official television stations or even in private stations in order to express a view. We did not see a single Tunisian political party after the revolution launched a cultural program. This, of course, had its impact. Before the revolution, there were shortcomings by the intellectuals, either because they kept their heads down, or they were in the lap of authority, or in many instances they fled abroad or they fled into silence, which is something that exists. But the problem is, after the revolution, and this is the big disaster, many so-called artists rushed to grab posts in the interim government, either through posts or through future promises, and some of them chose to remain silent because they fear what might happen and the authority that might come to power, especially those leftist liberals and others who feared the rise of the extremist right wing and extremist right wing Islamist movement, and this is what happened. A series of events happened in Tunisia after the revolution, and they were very dangerous and are a grave threat to the intellectual scene. And I will mention three incidents very quickly. The first one is the prohibition of the showing of a movie at the Africa Hall, and the cinema was actually destroyed. And it is well known for showing cultural movies because the film was described as being blasphemous, because the title was La Allah La Sidi, which is no God, no master, and they basically just judged the film by its title. And of course the attack was carried by Salafi Muslims, and this was followed by another incident, also a dangerous one, in what is known as the Nisma satellite channel. This channel showed a movie, a film on the Iranian movie Persepolis, which is an animated movie. And it was and this movie was dubbed in the local Tunisian dialect, and this created chaos in the street, and the owner of the channel and those who work with it were declared targets for to have their blood spilled, and there were attacks against the satellite channel, and the home of the owner of the satellite channel was attacked. A cylinder of gas was exploded, and the maid who was working in the house was also assaulted, and this was premeditated murder. And the parties that are considered Islamist did not take a stand. Rather, it is as if that by their silence they were allowing this movement and considering it some sort of blasphemy. Rather, even though this movie was actually a testimony to the deviation that has taken place in the Iranian Revolution and its repercussions on Iranian society during the Khomeini period. And this leads us to the third incident, which is the prohibition or the banning of a piece of abstract art, a sculpture, an abstract sculpture, and it was a sculpture of a woman. It was banned from a public street because it was considered indecent. This abstract sculpture was banned, even though the artist, who was a woman, wanted to use this as an expression of the Tunisian revolution, but the Muslim extremists objected to this. So we see that. We see that cinema, that art was attacked in the cinema, media was attacked, and that it prompted the owner of the satellite channel had to apologize publicly, and this is frightening that somebody had to change the channel's input and because of public pressure. Also, we see the sculpture, what happened to the sculpture, and this is the start of a true battle, and I'm very optimistic that we will have a confrontation, and I think this is a good opportunity to create cultural warriors in the Tunisian scene so that we will continue to have this scene, because you need to put your life in danger so that you can realize the true value of your life. And this is a chance for everyone, either to be creative or something else. Thank you.
Khaled?
أيضا للإجابة
To respond to the question, I will also look back. In Egypt, on May 15, 1971, Anwar al-Sadat started what he named the corrective revolution. And this revolution, in its activities, included combating Egyptian culture with everything that al-Sadat had at the time. I'm from a family with the cultural history. My father is a poet and writer. So was my grandfather. I am from a family of writers. Therefore, our family friends are also Egyptian writers who are well known. My father received a phone call from Anwar al-Sadat right before the May 1971. It was a very nice conversation. Anwar al-Sadat said to him, "I like you, I admire you, you're a great poet, you're a great writer, and I am so enthralled by you, and I'm so in love with you, so I will give you 5 days to leave the country. And if you were to wait any longer than 5 days, I'm going to arrest you." My father left in 1971 and died abroad, never again to return to Egypt since 1971 until he died in 87. My first maternal uncle and my second maternal uncle then fled, as well as more family friends. All of them left the country one after the other. This reached a point where a very well-known writer and journalist, considered and is indeed one of the most important and famous journalists in the Arab world, Muhammad Hassanain Hakel, wrote in 1975 an article saying that all Egyptian intellectuals are living outside of Egypt except for me. Of course, this is a great hyperbole on his part, but he just wanted to draw the impression that there is a war, a vicious war being waged against Egyptian intellectuals. And I don't want to name any names here because you may not know them, but Egyptian intellectuals, we can actually write a list of 200 Egyptian intellectuals who fled to Egypt, to Beirut or Iraq or Kuwait or London or Paris. Approximately 90% of Egyptian intellectuals were concentrated in these 5 places. And in the same period, large numbers of persons who were affiliated with Islamic trends returned, after they had fled in the 60s, they had fled Abdel Nasser in the 60s to Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the countries of the Arabian Gulf. They returned to Egypt in the mid-70s, and at that point we saw the beginning of a large campaign in Egypt to publicize Islamic thought through proselytizers, and a large public campaign was held to go to Afghanistan to fight the Red Enemy in Afghanistan. And after Sadat's death, of course, the Islamic trends in in Egyptian universities were also funded, and there's an important incident done by Nabawi Ismail, who was the Egyptian Minister of Interior in the late 70s. Before that, he was the governor of Asyut. He armed some religious student groups at the University of Asyut in 1975 and in 1976 in order to confront the liberals and leftists at university campuses in Egypt at the time. Hosni Mubarak came along and he continued on the same path. He continued to fight intellectual trends and to belittle every intellectual and to support Islamic trends, while arresting some elements of the Islamic trend in a double game to entrench their strength by recognizing them as an eventual threat in the future, but in the meantime supporting them. And after Mubarak was toppled, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, SCAF, continued with the same policy, which is fund the Islamic trend and directly make bargains with the Muslim Brotherhood. And at the same time, the council continued on the path of sectarian strife that Anwar al-Sadat used very wisely. Of course, between quotes, this is really diabolical. Starting with the Red Corner or Zawiya al-Hamra events in June 1981, which is a few months before he died, and he continued this project of sectarian strife until the disastrous event that happened in January 2011 with the attack on the Church of All Saints in Alexandria, which is now being referred to as an incident that was perpetrated by the Ministry of Interior and then Minister of Interior Habib al-Adli. And the Islamic trend is receiving continuous support, and this idea of sectarian strife is receiving more support as well. And if we were to look at this atmosphere, we must realize and we must think that those who own the media are governments and businessmen. And both these parties, governments and businessmen, have financial interests that are completely connected to the interests of major financial institutions in the world. And these institutions have a direct interest in advertising and encouraging fear in the world. And this is what's happening in Egypt and in the Arab world today. And I would like to reiterate an idea that I wrote a lot about, which is the use of the Islamic trend and the popular or the populist discourse to attempt to reach the masses through the simplest means possible. And I had recently written an article called Seduction. And here there's no easier way to seduce the masses without having a superficial and silly and simplistic discourse that only focuses on generalities and only looks at and ignores facts.
I'm going to give the floor to the lady there, and I will appeal to the speakers also to be very brief so we can give more.
We can be long.
You have the floor.
Thank you. I'm Erin McCandless from Interpeace and Journal of Peace Building and Development. I'm reflecting a bit on the liberation movements that took over the state in Africa and in other parts of the world, and how in many countries it's been very difficult to create a strong social contract and very positive relationships between state and society. And I'm wondering if you've thought about that in the context of these transitional governments, and how, do you think that with nonviolent civil society-led movements moving into government, there will be more opportunity to do that better, to create better relationships with state and society? Or do you think, again, power will corrupt and it will be difficult? So I'd be curious to hear about that. And then related to that is, what would you say, what do you think are the markers or drivers of resilience and social cohesion within your societies that can be built upon and fostered and supported? Thank you.
Thank you. Khaled, please.
This relationship between the government and the society must be built upon the independence of intellectual, independence in the capability of acting and capability of thinking. In reality, the situation, the actual situation in Egypt is far from this. We still the Supreme Council, Military Council, still works with the mechanisms that do not have the independence in thinking. And there was a chance, a big chance, through the civil society in Egypt and through the institution, the intellectual and political institutions in the 20th century, to create this social contract, this new social contract, and it was very easy. Maybe I say it's easily, but that was evident for all the intellectuals and political thinkers in Egypt, and all who are specialized in law and constitutional law in Egypt, on the easiest way to reach this social contract. But we are in front of a political situation which is not independent, in a situation where there was foreign occupation, and that prevented this contract. Kamel? In reality, there is a common element between the people in Tunisia, which makes him strong and make him capable of facing any way of going around the revolution, especially coming from the outside. There is a movement, a political movement in Tunisia, and there is a movement coming from Qatar, which is the Gulf branch of the intervention from the outside. And the Tunisian people today, you may recall that there is a protest movement against the presence of the Emir of Qatar during the first meeting of the Constitutional Council in Tunisia. There was a movement, a protest in the streets against this presence in our council, in the first meeting of the council, although many other personalities were going to be present, Sarkozy and other personalities, but this is a complete rejection of this kind of intervention. And what Qatar did in Libya, for example, this was one of the causes of the protest from the Tunisian people. And they were with one of the movements in Tunisia, the Nahda Islamiyya, the Islamic Renaissance, that is supported by the Gulf people and the petrodollar, with their petrodollars, and the Western governments. I have to recall what Chomsky said, that the West will never allow the democracies to be built in the Arab world because the West wants to have his hegemony over this region. And we can talk about the West as institutions, not as civil society or peoples. And the Tunisian society also has something also in common, that they are always against this omnipresence of some elements of the new culture that they want to impose on the people, like whatever is left from the Bourguibian culture. And this was the cause of the revolution, and one day this revolution will be studied, and it will reflect the superiority of these people that wanted to have education and superiority as the face of the revolution. Also the thinkers and the free intellectuals, and the role of the women in Tunisia and the emancipation of women in Tunisia, all that was made the woman presence very evident in the revolution. You can see all the pictures of the Habib Bourguiba street, and that was the street where I say that the clock tower was built in front of the Ministry of Interior. The women in Tunisia were participating, be it with the headscarf but without the headscarf. The women with her culture and her freedom, she confronted the police and the bullets. This woman will never be shut down because she constitutes half of the people and the society in Tunisia. And we had, as women and men in Tunisia, some kind of red line that we couldn't cross concerning the woman. Of course, every time we try to touch upon it, but the whole society, men and women, and I confirm men and women are all against this, and they want to go through modernism. We don't want only to speak about history, but what happens today and what many intellectuals were talking about. There is no way we can go back. Even in the revolution, these people who went to the streets to say to Ben Ali, dégage, leave us, they said it in French. And this is also a symbol. They talk to him in French, dégage, leave, and this means that the people is open to the other cultures, to the other civilizations, and it will never go back to the extremism or the reactionism. We have to go we will never go backwards, and we will still go on. And in the first declaration of the Prime Minister Al-Jabali, when he said we are in the sixth Caliphate, and he speaks about some symbols or something coming from God. This is something or something divine. We are a society, an intellectual society, open to the world, and there is no way that we go through that, because the Tunisian society is open and civilized, and anyone who speaks in that way will not be taken seriously and will never be in power for more than a week. We are still on our feet, and we will never cease of fighting, and we are ready to go back to the streets and face any maneuver to go around our revolution. And the people of Tunisia thanks the people of the United States, and of course I'm joking.
Just turn your thing down. Just turn down.
Shukran Aziman. I am from one of your neighboring countries, and I'm old enough to remember the role of American CIA in toppling Prime Minister Mossadegh of Iran. I have one question, and then I have a comment that I want to share with everybody. I go with the comment first. I like everyone to look for the work of Shirin Neshat, a very impressive artist. Her new work is about fatwa, and it's called Shirin Neshat Overruled. Also, her last movie is called Women Without Men. Very political, very timely for gender equality. But my question is, with all the admirations that we have for your both countries, how the military was influenced not to treat the public harshly. This is something that other countries are suffering, when military treated the public very harshly, and the revolution gets disrupted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to add to your question. The military, both in Tunis and Morocco, was relatively civilized if you compare them to what's going on in Syria, in Yemen, and what went on in Libya. And I want to add the future role of the military in Egypt. I don't think this is the case of Tunis, but I want to ask Kamel about the penetrations of the Salafis in Tunis, which is a new phenomenon. Kamel, with Khaled. English.
English?
Yeah.
حاضر. A political system normally is not homogeneous. We have in any political system many courants, many rivers, many and during the 5-6 years in Egypt, Mubarak tried to bring his son Gamal after him, and he did a great effort. And during these 5-6 years, he had an American veto, clearly, that America don't want Gamal after Hosni. And Hosni Mubarak was totally and 100% colonized by Washington. The White House was the ruler during Mubarak regime. But for the first and the last time in his life, he didn't hear what the White House tell him. And the army was against. And we hear a clear message from the army 4 years ago and 3 years ago that no, we cannot accept Gamal after you. We need the army to rule Egypt. And this message was said recently by Osama al-Bez, the second in the foreign ministry in Egypt. He came with Gamal Mubarak in Washington, and Hillary Clinton said to Osama al-Bez, we need the army to rule, not a civilian one in Egypt. And Osama al-Bez said this to Hassanin Haikal, and Hassanin Haikal published this 1 month ago. Then this is one. The army was against, and the Egyptian intelligence was against. When the Egyptian revolution began in 25th of January, Egypt is a very important country in the area, in the Arab world. It's a country with 19 million people. It's a huge weight politically and culturally. And the world cannot accept really huge surprises in Egypt. This, for what it was very logic, that the army and the Egyptian intelligence make the step, clear step, that Mubarak is a paper who we have to turn it out, and he is finished, literally, and we only need to make such a small breath to throw it out. Then the army was not at all civilized. In politics, we cannot understand politics by words as civilized or gentle or kind. No, have interests and relations. And in Egypt, the situation was very clear that we refuse Gamal, we refuse the Mubarak, the people refuse it. We cannot accept, we, army, the West, etc., the Arabic thrones, etc., cannot accept a revolutionary government in Egypt. It is really dangerous to Israel, to Europe, to everyone. It's really dangerous. 18 days, it's enough. More than 18 days, what happens after that, who knows? What happens, maybe political leaders will come on, maybe a developed parties during the revolution. 6 months in Egypt is really dangerous for the area. The army did the work they have to do, and they did it good for them. And they totally mislead the transition period from February till now, totally mislead. And I can say with a clear mind that 80% of Egyptians now find these periods as a very bad transition period leading by the army. Then it was not at all related to any kindness or civilization. It was interests, finance, money, financial relation, etc., etc., etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Khaled. Kamel.
الشأن التونسي
The Tunisian situation is completely different from the other revolutionary Arab states because the Tunisian army is almost a civilian army. It's a completely neutral institution, and in the revolution it was no longer neutral, rather it took the side of the people, and the Tunisian army was defending the revolutionary Tunisian people from the gunfire of the police forces, and at one point it actually fired back at the police forces who were firing at the Tunisian masses. And this is a testimony that must be recorded for the military institution that defended the revolution in Tunisia from the very first days to the last. I add to that and say that the military establishment in Tunisia refused to take over power when the Tunisian people asked it to take power during the revolution because of the sniper actions in Tunisia and the assassinations that used to take place in Tunisia. The New York Times editorial on the 18th of January, or on the night of the 14th January, I talked about this in the editorial I wrote, and I said that we don't feel safe that night until we hear the military helicopters flying overhead. So the military establishment in Tunisia is completely different from the other military establishments that we see on TV. And the Tunisian army, when the sanitary workers were on strike, were collecting trash from the streets. It used to deliver milk to homes with infants. It used to protect the institutions, including the security institution. And to this very day, the army still protects the Ministry of Interior. This Tunisian army, as you see, is completely different, and it actually is historically has historic animosity against the police department, because Zainuddin Ben Ali tried to weaken the military establishment while bolstering the police establishment, because this is a police state, and he knew that the Tunisian army has allegiance only to the country. A quick comment, so I won't forget. When I talked about Al-Nahda, this movement, this Islamist movement, actually has internal opposition. It has in it excellent elements that want to be open-minded and are somewhat close to the Turkish party. And the question is, will these open-minded elements be given the opportunity to work and to shine in this movement, which has now reached power, or will the extremist Salafi elements will continue to lead the party politically? We hope that these open-minded elements will be given a chance. As for the influx of and the penetration of extremist Islamists into the military establishment, this is something we dismiss completely because of the nature of the military establishment and its immunity to such leaks. It has always been neutral, and it was never penetrated by the followers of the former regime, so it will not be weak and will not be susceptible to any such penetration. We think the elections were held in almost democratic conditions. The Tunisian people went out and voted for who they want. It doesn't matter. Yes, there's another rights-based issues, and there was talk of votes being bought, and there's always these loopholes everywhere in the world. But the Tunisian people, for the first time in their life, have voted for who they want, and we hope that Abu Qasim al-Shabi's poetry, who said, if the people ever want life one day, then destiny shall respond. And destiny shall respond to the Tunisian people through those we have elected or through others. Thank you.
One more question and then we will wrap up. Yes, please. Yes.
Not too close, please, and lower the volume on your device.
Shazia Rafi from Parliamentarians for Global Action. You mentioned it briefly, the effect of, the possibility of the Turkish model. I know in the media here there is quite a lot of discussion about Turkey and the fact that you've got a religious party, but it is still center-right, it is moderate, it has democratic elections, the role of the military is getting less. Looking at what's coming ahead in Egypt and in Tunisia, is there much interaction between Turkey and the political parties in your countries, and is that something which is talked about by your own people and intellectuals?
Khaled?
أنا لدي حساسية خاصة.
I am especially averse to the idea of exporting models through states and through time. I think many American journalists are extremely infatuated and adore the idea of political models and transposing them from one area to the other and one era to the other. How can the Iranian model of 1979 be applied today, for example, in some kind of fictional state? This is a complete nonsense, and I don't know why there is this American infatuation with models and exporting them. I think there are always exceptional circumstances and exceptional historical phases, and time changes. The Turkish model started at a particular moment in history where international relations had specific aspects. Today, times are different. The international relations are different. The historic time period is different. Humanity is different. The development of ideas has changed. So I don't think that we can transpose one era onto another, and we cannot transpose one model onto another, except in the dreams of American think tanks. This issue was something that Al-Nahda has really given us a headache with, this whole talk about the Turkish model. And they say that this model is a model of success, the success of a political party with religious affiliations. But when the Turkish president went to Egypt and visited Tunisia, he said that Turkey is secular. So secularism, but the word secular has become a swear word in Tunisia, and the word secular or a secular person has become an atheist, and equal to an atheist. And these parties like Al-Ghanouchi, for example, in Tunisia, is somebody who is from the dynasty of Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and in Syria, and he cannot be but a Salafi. That's what he was born as, and he can't change who he is. And of course, he has a glorious history on the matter, and there's no need to go into details. He is a Salafi, and every time he opens his mouth, a new disaster happens. And every time he talks, he, of course, exposes more of his Salafi nature. And in Tunisia, there is a saying, or it is understanding that the Tunisian people have actually colluded against Al-Nahda and that they let them win. So that this party will expose itself to the Tunisian people during the elections, and all of its big leaders are Salafis, and the more they talk, the more exposed they are, and the more they show that they are on the outskirts of history. Therefore, if this political party were to have a role in the future, then it must have faith in its open-minded cadres and its open-minded and young elements, because what is being claimed by its elders, this in Tunisia we don't use the Sidi Sheikh title, because this means my master, the Sheikh. This is something that we read in stories of the Muslim caliphs past, and this is not something we use in our modern world. And this is why Mustafa al-Marzouqi was voted president, because he is a well-known and respected doctor and professor and storyteller and intellectual, and he was well known as a storyteller before he became a politician and a scholar. Therefore, we hope that Arab peoples would go ahead on their paths and that they be fully aware of what they want. What we're seeing in Libya is very sad. What has happened after the revolution and after the toppling of Gaddafi's regime. The Libyan people must understand that they are faced with a great responsibility and cannot engage in a civil war, and the revolutionaries cannot start fighting amongst themselves. In Syria too, we hope, and in Yemen, we hope that they arrive at the banks, on the shores of safety. Tunisia was the first spark, and we hope that things will stabilize in Tunisia and in Egypt as well, and that these revolutions will become models. Egypt and Tunisia had chemistry, and they've always had chemistry throughout history. There's always been a feeling of empathy between the two nations, and we hope that this will spread to the rest of the Arab world. We also hope that the West will focus on other revolutions that have been aborted or are almost being aborted, like the one in the Gulf, the Bahrain revolution, that we were saddened because it did not receive the attention it needed, not in the West and not in the East, for reasons we are all well aware of, in that petroleum rules the world, regardless of anything else.
Thank you very much. I have a slightly different view with the Turkish model. I don't think, like Khaled said, we can copy the steps they took to reach where they reach. But in the final analysis, I think it will be ideal for the Arab world to have a similar type of governance. I think that's the idea. But I don't think we can replicate what Kemal Atatürk did in the Arab world. In any case, I think you all agree with me that these two distinguished personalities have been extremely eloquent, lucid in their thinking, and we appreciate what they put to us today in terms of the experience both in Egypt, Tunis, and actually they also spoke about the Arab world in general, and I think we should give them a very good hand. شكرا.